Good morning. So this morning we're going to go back to the 914 at 75 and work on the longitudinal. I got some parts in from Restoration Design. So let's take a look at what's going on there. Just to recap, did a major repair with this rear longitudinal panel that came with the car. All this was rusted out in here, and so basically the fender had already been cut off. So that made things really easy. In fact, you cannot do this type of repair without that fender being cut off because you just can't get your welder in there. So all that was done a year ago, quite some time. And also the door sill was already off when I got it. There's one triangular support remaining that actually looks in pretty good shape. I'll take a closer look at that. So what I'm going to do this morning is I need to put the jack plate on here. Now these things, I doubt that many people use them anymore. Let's look at the existing one on the driver's side. And it's all about changing the tire on the side of the road with the cheesy jack that came with the car. That being said, in the outer rocker cover, there is basically a square hole for this tube. So if you had the original rocker covers and you didn't have the jack plate on, say you repaired the longitudinal and didn't put the jack plate in the tube on, you're just going to have a hole. I think you can actually get fiberglass ones that don't have that hole, or you could take the original and patch the hole and just have a smooth look. For me, it's a pretty quick process to get the tube on there and the plate. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. That way the car stays kind of OE. So here's the part. And I've already primed with weld-through primer. I tried to get some down inside of the tube. And then here's the supporting plate. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think I've done a video on this before on an earlier 914, but it won't hurt to do another, for those of you that are following along. So let's mock up the placement. Okay, when you look at this part, there's very little difference between top and bottom. However, there is a slight difference, and what it is if you can see on this lip is a little bit longer than that lip. That lip is the bottom because it wraps the bottom of the longitudinal. See how nicely that fits? Those guys in Canada are the best. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and secure this with sheet metal screws. And then I'll take the tube and put some kind of something on the end of it, stick it in there, and that'll mark where it needs to be welded. And I'll probably just do a couple spot welds, kind of leave it loose so I can maneuver it around. At least I get it not plumb with the hole, square with the hole. And then once I'm satisfied it's going to fit perfectly, I'll weld the tube in. Obviously, you can't weld the tube once you get the plate on. You can kind of see an indentation where it's supposed to go. However, that is imprecise, and I wouldn't count on just welding it on without double checking with the plate. Follow me? All right, hold that joker on with a magnet. Put a couple spot welds on it. See how it lines up. Success. So, yep. Actually didn't sheet metal screw it on. I just kind of lined it up and held it in place. And then, you know, it's a little tricky. But I think ultimately you want to kind of get in that indentation with that tube because there's a flat spot there. You definitely want to go there. So now I'm going to go around. Now, these welds on this tube, they're a little tough because you're welding in that crotch between the sheet metal and the tube. TIG would probably be better. But ultimately, a lot of the weight, if you think about it, is going to be borne by the plate because it acts as a support. So just keep that in mind. You know, I mean, you want good welds, but don't think that the whole weight of the car is going to be on that tube sticking out like that. The Germans are smarter than that. Well, certainly not the prettiest welds, but they're functional. I mean, that joker's on there good. So I'm going to hit all that with some weld-through primer, and then we'll go to work on the plate. Okay, drilled out for the rosette welds. Did 3 along the top, 4 along each side, and then 3 along the bottom. Now I'll start using my sheet metal screws through the same holes. I'll drill a little pilot hole in the longitudinal beneath it and start pulling it up against and kind of hammering it as I go. Yeah, we're getting a pretty tight fit. The top looks pretty darn good. The bottom we'll have to fold up, but once I'll do the sides first, and that'll cook all this up real good and make that bottom easier to bend up. And yeah, I'll use a sheet metal screw to pull that in, so no worries. All right, yeah, that turned out pretty nice. Rosette welds are pretty clean. I did do a couple little seam, this would be a lap weld because you're lapping one piece of metal over the other. A couple on each side. I don't know that the bottom top needs them. So I'm going to grind those off, and then we'll move on to the sill. Now, one thing I did note is that this sticks out a lot more than the other side, which is OE. However, it'd be very simple to trim that off. So I'm going to wait until I get ready to put the outer, the rocker covers on, and then I can take a hard look at that and see how much I want to trim that. I'm thinking about where the fender goes and everything. I think you can still get a Sawzall in there to do that trimming. So let me grind some welds, and then we'll start working on this sill. Okay, door sill. So if we look at the OE part on the driver's side, you can see that the sheet metal for the door sill comes about, it looks like about 3/8 off of where the inner and the outer longitudinal are welded together. These little nibs here are probably remnants of the decorative plate that goes on there. Also note that the sill itself is spot welded onto the longitudinal, right? It mates up with the jamb. We have to look at the other side because that piece has been cut out. And then if you look down here, basically same thing. So this is a door hinge jamb. There's a word RD has for it. And then there's a little sliver of the sill that goes down all the way down to that front support. So you have a front support right up by the wheel well, a middle support, which is still on the other side, looks to be in pretty good shape, and then a back support. Now the back support aligns, looks like about a 1/2 inch where the rear longitudinal laps over the outer longitudinal. So you can see the spot welds there. So figuring out exactly where this triangular support goes is relatively easy. It is spot welded along the top, and there's like a little notch for this little shelf, if you will. And the decorative plate also secures down onto that. You can see where those holes are. So some of them are plastic, some of them are a nice shiny alloy, aluminum, whatever. So anyway, it's neither here nor there. So now let's go back and look at the other side. So here's the part in place. Looks like where I've taken the rear longitudinal and lapped over the top, it's sticking up a little, so I'm probably going to have to notch right there, just a touch, or maybe just bend it a little. Okay, and then I also need to look at that piece that's missing and see how that's going to work in regards to adding this. The jack plate that I just added, I'll need to put some weld-through primer on top of it because it's about to be covered. And then, like we were just noting, the triangular piece, which I've got down there on the floor, will add right into here. That one appears to be pretty good shape. When the previous owner drilled out the spot welds, a little excess material there I need to clean up. Other than that, it actually fits pretty darn good. He did a pretty decent job removing the original, so I'm pleased about that. So, okay, well let me clean up this this support. I think it's smart to go ahead and put in the rear support, triangular support, before we put the sill on, because it gets super tight trying to get up in there with the welder. And at that point, once I clean up all those protruding spot welds, should be in pretty good shape to put this in. I'll have to prime the underside because, again, it just gets hard to paint because it's a tight spot. So as I was test fitting this, I realized at the end of this slender segment, that tab right there, that gets bent down to a 90 degrees, and it fits up against that last support. Now, of course, when I got in there with a wire brush to clean it up, and that tab was actually, a remnant was still on there, of course, that rust hole opened. Now, that's all really thin metal there. I kind of cut corners by just doing this patch, and I know I was really struggling to find good metal in there. Instead of cutting that out and struggling to get, good metal, I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little, basically like a drop down on this tab, maybe a couple of inches square, and just cover that and then lap weld it over it. And at least it'll be covered. That hole right there is, when I pulled that remnant off, it's a spot weld that ripped out. I'll weld right through that. So that's not a problem. It's just that rust hole needs to be addressed. So let me cut a little segment of sheet metal, and I think by actually fixing it to this piece, it'll work quite nicely, because then I can just kind of press it in and lap weld it over. Alrighty, I got the triangle primed and welded in. Just used a magnet, and that helped me keep that plane for the sill. And of course I double checked the measurement from the edge of the support to this rib, because this seam is a little bit off from the other side. So now I'll check fitment on the sill itself again. Yeah. So I cut a notch out here because this sill is actually supposed to go under. That's the reason that is offset, but it's all right. So yeah, once I press it down with sheet metal screws, of course I got to drill a bunch of holes for rosette welds. And let's check that area up front here I was discussing. So yeah, so there's the bent tab that lines up with that front support. So I think what I'm going to do is just cut a square of sheet metal and tag it on to that end where it dangles down, and then I can press it up against the offending metal. Okay, so we got it primed. We got holes drilled for rosette welds, a little tab on the end to cover the offending hole. So let's take it and screw it down. Yeah, that's looking really nice. It's going to get a little tricky underneath the door there. I mean, if the door was off the hinges, no problem. I generally don't like taking the doors off these things because it helps me keep checking alignment as I go, make sure I'm not tweaking the body. We'll get it tightened up back there somehow. All right, yeah, it's turned out pretty good. All the rosette welds along the top went really nice. I've got good support here on the triangles. And then down in front here where it's super tight, that little flap actually worked really well because it helped hold this skinny piece down so I could get these other rosette welds. That's a tight spot right underneath the door. And it covered up that rusty hole, so, and I got one little weld back behind there, so that's nice and solid. There's a bit of a gap here, but that'll be filled with seam sealer. I mean, everything's got really good strength. I'm super pleased about the way this turned out. So I'm gonna just grind off these welds and we'll call this a done deal on this video. Thank you for joining me, and subscribe, comment, like, all that good stuff. Next up, could be the front of this thing. With the impending tariffs on Canada, I think I want to go ahead and buy that piece before it gets marked up 25%. So I know on the tunnel, I'm waiting on my buy cables and fuel line, but that's all American products. So hopefully we won't be getting tariffs on that stuff. Thanks again, guys.